Manchester's Piccadilly Basin. Once a busy terminus at the height of canal use in the early 19th century, it acted as an important hub in the distribution of goods and materials throughout the region. In the heart of the basin, Carver's warehouse is a reminder of the basin's former role in industrial Manchester and is one of the most important listed buildings in the city's industrial heritage. Built in 1806, the stone-built structure retains virtually all of its original timber and cast-iron internal structure. But in recent times, the warehouse had fallen on hard times, and little respect for the building had been shown in successive alterations. The challenge for owner Town Centre Securities was not only in restoring the building back to its former glory, but doing so in a way that made the development commercially viable. Key to the project was the addition of a new two-storey building and atrium of contemporary design, linking into the 19th century building.
The main challenge for a restoration project like this is to find a use which is sustainable in the longer term, to actually get the use that the property will convert best to and perform going forward, well, for the longest length of time. I think we did that in the choice of making this into offices, and then the real challenge was how do we link it in with the new building on the front, which I believe we've done very successfully.
The main challenges of a project like this, restoring and reusing a building, from an engineering viewpoint, are the understanding of the building. What is it? What's it all about, actually, in structural terms? How does it fit together? Where's its Achilles heel, actually? That's often the thing with it. So getting that understanding of here, a masonry building with tough timber floors, and its Achilles heels actually were its columns probably, and its roof, which was always just meant to be an attic, and we were trying to load it to the same levels as other things. But those are probably the key challenges with a particular building like this.
With Carver's warehouse being a listed building, there were considerable constraints on its restoration and development. In order to maintain each of the floor plates as open as possible and to minimise disturbance to the old structure, it was decided to provide vertical circulation external to the original building. This was achieved by demolishing a non-listed block of two-storey terrace buildings adjacent to the warehouse. In its place, the new two-storey precast concrete and steel building and four-storey steel and structural glass atrium were constructed. The two-storey section provides the main entrance, meeting rooms and a cafe, while the atrium provides additional entrances, stairs and access bridges to the warehouse. So, was demolishing the old terrace the only solution to make the new scheme viable?
We looked at a number of options, but the trouble with the old terrace, was it was so narrow. It was built as basically one up, one down old housing. So it was so narrow, you really couldn't do anything with it. And of course it masked this wonderful building behind it. So actually there was no option, but it had to go. And we were very grateful when we were working with English Heritage that they bought into that idea. Hence we managed to go ahead and put this new facility on the front, which allowed the old building to function as offices.
The height of the scheme was determined by the existing buildings, the two-storey Rochdale Canal building, and of course the eaves height of the warehouse itself. And so that determined that the vertical circulation would be in an atrium, because we wanted to be able to see the warehouse through the four-storey building, so we made it as transparent as possible. But by putting the vertical circulation and the means of escape in the new building, it meant that we didn't have to make any great intervention into the structure of the existing warehouse, and that was core really to the listed building consent that we had.
The difficulty of being able to accurately define a scope of works for the project led to the adoption of a construction management contract. This type of contract is appropriate where the client enters into direct, separate trade contracts. In this situation, a construction manager is appointed to administer the contract on behalf of the client. At Carver's warehouse, Martin Stockley Associates took on the role of construction manager, with the work divided into main work packages such as masonry and timber repairs, the precast concrete structure and glazed envelope.
As engineers, we had sat down and thought what was the best way to develop this building out, and we know that we've dealt a lot with listed buildings and existing buildings, and we know it's quite a tricky business because with a new building you can design pretty much everything in an office, but with an existing building you're going to find secrets that even if you do lots of research you're going to find something that surprises you regularly. And the problem with doing that under a normal contract of any sort, a standard JCT contract or under any kind of design and build, is every time there's a surprise the client has a bill to pay usually, and it's not a fair negotiation either, because you've contracted with me to do the work and now the work's changed. I have the upper hand. So we were puzzling over how should we handle that, and our view was that the best way to deal with it was to construction manage it. That is, that we let packages of work that we could define as we went along.
We've worked with on a number of listed buildings in the past, and they never seem to quite pan out like you think they're going to do when you set off, particularly when you can't see a lot of what you're going to uncover until you get really into the guts of it. So we were worried that we would uncover things that English Heritage would be very interested in, that we might take us some time to resolve how we managed it and how we repaired certain parts of the structure. So we thought that this was the best way of allowing that flexibility, which I'm sure is the case.
One of the main engineering challenges of the project was justifying the suitability of the warehouse for use as modern offices, which meant proving that the old structure could accommodate the loadings imposed by contemporary uses.
One of the key challenges with listed buildings, historic buildings, is dealing with the change from a historic previous loading to a modern loading. And there's two sides to that. One is the actual load, and the other one is proving that it complies with the code loading. The first of those is the more important, and here it wasn't such a big deal with the floors, which were very robust, but we did have to go through an exercise of testing all of the cast iron columns, some of which had fractured, and where they were damaged or fractured, giving them some extra support. On the second one, it's actually a kind of grueling process of often just demonstrating that the floor has taken quite high loads before, and we even use photographs for those sorts of things. Here's the floor when it had a stack of things on it, and it worked.
Repairing heavily damaged timber, masonry and cast iron structures in keeping with the building's original construction was a significant challenge of the scheme. Accepted conservation guidelines had to be followed in order to preserve as much of the historic fabric and character of the building as possible.
The guidelines are, yes, they're agreed with English Heritage and with the conservation officers around the country. There are plenty of guidelines listed and publications as to the methods that they approve of, as much as the methods that they don't approve of. So it's a matter of agreeing with the local authority on the correct systems which are appropriate for any particular case.
One of the clear advantages to going down the procurement route we chose was that there are certain times when there's delay in a project like this, and particularly over the stone cleaning. This building had a number of coverings put on it, some render, some paint, and we wanted to clean the building off as best we could. Clearly we had to try and preserve the stone, and so it was a real debate with English Heritage and the conservationists about how the best method, I should say, really, of cleaning the stone, and that took some time to resolve. I mean, we did sample patches all over the building of various in various different ways until we could come to a conclusion.
The floors presented a particular problem, as historic structural failure under load had resulted in floors dipping by as much as 200 millimetres between perimeter and centre. This was addressed by a conventional raised floor system to provide level floor finishes. However, it was installed in a very unconventional way.
The floors of the building are actually quite robust, but what had happened over time is that the way that they'd been connected to the columns had meant that you'd got long-term compression of the timber across its weak axis, which you can see it in any number of buildings. And of course what happens with that is it collects up, so that on the ground floor it's only an inch or so of movement. By the time you get to the top floor there's 200 millimetres. So we took the view to use a raised floor to balance that out, and of course the floorboards, because it had been a warehouse, it was fairly battered. And we wanted to keep all of the floorboards, which we did, so that you could see them from the underside. So the raised floor was a good solution to that, but at the top floor where that dip was worse, we still had to have an area, in fact you can still see it now, where we've had to have a slightly raised section because we just couldn't get enough out of the floor.
We had the challenge of working out how to make the floors level, which we did with a fairly conventional raised access floor, albeit laid in a very unconventional way, because the little pillar supports which support the floor, each one would be a different height, and then as we got to the perimeter there would be virtually no space at all. The floor had to be laid on top of the existing. But in all cases we didn't want to disturb the appearance of the floor from the underside. But the benefit of that was it gave us the opportunity to hide some services in the middle of the floor where there was a void, and also to insert sound insulation between floors, which is obviously quite important. So I think that was really one of the biggest challenges, how to make the office space desirable and livable in a what would otherwise be quite a difficult building.
The other big challenge was the lower ground floor, where the original narrow boats used to come into the building to offload. The floor ceiling height wasn't good enough for offices, and there was also damp due to water penetration. This necessitated excavation below the canal arm and putting in a new floor to create the right floor ceiling height.
On the lower ground floor there was some nice stonework down there, but there was also some suspended slabs over the old canal arm. So what we did was we went in and took all of that up, took the stonework up very carefully and stored it, and then ripped the old slabs out, dealt with the contaminated materials in the canal arms, and then actually took the opportunity to put the new slab in just a little bit lower to give ourselves some extra headroom on that floor, because again the headrooms are always difficult in warehouses. So we managed to grab another 150 millimetres or so, which has made all the difference.
So what about the challenges posed by the new structure adjacent to Carver's warehouse? How did the team set about designing a new structure that would complement the old structure?
The design was a challenge. The initial design, the concept design, was carried out by Ian Simpson Architects, who took the project up to planning stage. But basically the new design is unashamedly contemporary, but the front element is clad in stone, which we felt reflected the warehouse itself, and the atrium, because it needed to be transparent, was frameless glass construction, and that in itself meant that it was going to be a modern design and a modern form of construction. But we feel that the forms and the materials we've used reflect the robustness of the original industrial feel of the warehouse.
There's an interesting question of choice of materials on the new section of the building, and we took our lead from the existing building, which was materials in their raw state, timber, cast iron, stone, and looked to do the same thing in the new building. So we've got a lot of glass in the new building, we've got timber floors down, but the main structure, we didn't want to put a steel frame in there and hide it, so we chose a precast concrete panel system, and that has worked very well, even though it's not the ideal building to do a precast system on, because each panel is slightly different from the next. But it did mean once we'd got the foundations complete, that superstructure went up very quickly, and we were able then to have two teams working, one in the new build, one in the existing building. And we've finished with a building that still has these good, clear raw materials: concrete, glass, timber.
The new structure presented a couple of problems. The main one was in respect of levels. The building itself, with it having a lower ground floor and ground floor going upwards, Carvers, was actually at a different level to the floor level, generally around the basin, and particularly out to the street. So when we demolished the narrow terracing in the front, that actually was at a completely different level. So we somehow had to match in the new levels with the existing Carvers, and we achieved that by doing the bridge links across, which actually slope up slightly, and we gradually ironed out the difference as we go up the building.
The reviving of a redundant historic warehouse has not only provided high-quality office accommodation, but also brought economic and social benefits for the whole area. The project combines the best qualities of restoration with good modern architecture. The design of the new building and the renovations to the warehouse provide a pleasant, stimulating office environment, whilst retaining the character and architectural interest of the listed warehouse building. So, what do the team take away from the project?
Positives are, it's a great statement for the building. We've built up a very good rapport with English Heritage and Manchester City Council planners, which stands us in good stead because we have got other buildings and other properties in the city. In fact, we've just finished one down on Deansgate, another listed building. So you've always got to take positives away in the long term, and we are a long-term investor. I'm sure this will pay dividends.
If we look at the achievement from our point of view, it's coming to a building that had been almost derelict. It had been used as an old bathroom showroom for 30 odd years, and taking it from that, convincing other people that it was worth doing the design, doing the construction, and moving in and actually living in the building, and to take that from start to finish, and also to finish with this really beautiful product at the end that other people think is beautiful, is deeply satisfying. I mean, it kind of embodies all the things engineers like doing, really, making things, standing back and looking at them and playing with them.